This conference will now be recorded.
I have started recording the session so that we can upload the, sorry, this is not working. Yeah, no, okay. So we can upload the training on user research. Okay, that said, a brief introduction on the topic. I'm going to talk about user research, understanding that most of you have already done most of the user research, but also from the point of someone that would approach the topic from the very beginning. So that's why in some cases I will go fast. No, sorry, okay. So first, a quick introduction. What do we understand as user research? It's just the methods and activities that we use to understand better why people do what they do, the human behavior. So what are they thinking and feeling, the people that we are designing for, why are they acting the way they do, what are their needs and wants in regards to the specific challenge we are designing for, what are the motivations and frustrations. So we've seen it already with examples of the initiatives before. So what do people think of the furniture in the parks? How do they perceive it, or just simply what's their own wants or expectations of how the public spaces should look like in the example of EVI of the landmarks net. And I think by now it's obvious and for all of you guys, but why do we need user research? Mostly because we design for others apart from ourselves, and we are sometimes not the user, meaning that there's all these other all this other background that we probably don't fully understand. So ideally, we would have a co-creation process in which we bring the user on board and we can together develop something, but that is not always realistic. And in those cases, we have to try to avoid projecting our own judgment or perspective on what we design and how we design things. Especially in your cases, you are tackling quite wicked, complicated issues that affect us all, and that they are usually often even in the public space. And that means that we have to try to understand every perspective as much as possible, be inclusive. So the user research, it's a must. And yeah, if you understand your users, of course, you can make designs that are relevant for them. And if you don't, there will probably be issues with whatever you design in terms of relevance, usability, etc., desirability. And just the other remark is that this is the one way we have as creatives or designers of something to prove that it works in the real world before we finish it and launch it. Now, all this sounds pretty obvious, but what we are trying to do with user research and why it's such a core element in a design approach or a design thinking approach is because implementing empathy in the process of development, it's what makes the whole difference, right? So we are all able to be empathic, but it's something that requires to take the time to exercise it. And so if we do it, we can ensure that we are producing something more relevant for the final user. And yeah, I just wanted to leave a beautiful quote from Emmy you can find it in the designscapes.org of IDEO, where they talk about empathy as one of the mindsets of their design thinking approach. But this is something shared in all types of design approaches. Now, when should we conduct user research? And this is a funny slide because I just wanted to put it in there to basically say that there is no such thing as too much user research, and it's an ongoing process. So even though probably most of you guys have already done, like you said, maybe you got lucky and all the early engagement with the users has been already finished, but there's a high chance that you will have to test again. And hopefully that's the case, because the more we test and implement user research throughout the development, the validation and the different iterations, the more we are including this perspective of the people in our process. And just a quote again, talk to your users about how they perceive your design and how they could imagine using it, or involve them directly in your design process to ensure that you are still on the right track. That's the summary of what I was just saying. So involving them, talking with them earlier on, but keeping them involved throughout the process, it's always gonna result in a better understanding of what you are designing for, and even the context of where you are designing. Now, more practical side of things. So what are the different tools and methods? And here I wanted to direct you, of course, to the Designscapes toolbox. There was a training module on an update on all the different tools that the team at Aalborg University have been collecting in the toolbox. And you have the Designscapes toolbox in the Designscapes website within resources. That's the first version. And then also the team has shared in the Facebook group the online open draft of the second version, where you're gonna find a lot of tools that are really important or useful for user research, and that they can be used at different stages of the process. So we have two different types of tools and methods. One is qualitative and the second type quantitative. And the qualitative are those that we use to gain a deep understanding of the user and their everyday life, or the specific experience of using something like an app, a website, a service. And these usually have in common that we launch open-ended questions, and we collect this information that is not based on numbers, but more on their own stories of the users. A selection of qualitative user research methods and tools are interviews, one we all know and we all use. You can interview people in the context of what you are designing for. So really trying to maybe elicit a bit of further thinking by being in situ in the place, or maybe you can just have a normal interview at their homes or nowadays online. Then personas, that is one of the tools you have in the Designscapes toolbox. It's scenarios or storyboards, cultural proofs, etc. Like I said, for time's sake, I cannot go through each of these, but later on we are gonna discuss more in detail and with examples to different approach or tools. But you can go to the Designscape toolbox and find a bit more of most of these. The other type of user research tools and methods, the quantitative. So here we are usually trying to collect as many answers from users as possible. They can be a survey or a questionnaire that we launch online, that we try to get a really representative sample of the type of people we are designing for. And it's about quantifiable or measurable data, and how can we translate this into maybe statistical insights. So some examples are surveys, questionnaires, eye tracking. The eye tracking is just for understanding better how a person uses our website. You have softwares that allows you to see where the person was looking while using our website, and that way you can make design choices on the website. The website design based on that. Another is A/B testing, where you give the user two options and they can compare, and there's usually also a questionnaire about it. There's many different user research tools, especially because there's the whole field of usability in the world of websites and apps, where they definitely have developed many different also quantitative tools. But here I try to not make it seem overwhelming and just give a selection of the most used and proven ones. Now, what's important, it's probably at the end of the day using what, in terms of what tools to use, is using what makes sense for your question and for the moment in the process. Because of course, not all of them, some of them are really flexible, but not all of them are as meaningful, depending on the moment. So what will be this process of starting your user research? You first and foremost have to reflect on what is your intention with this. So of course, it sounds really obvious, but it's always good to point this out. What is the problem you're trying to solve? What is the end goal with this process of user research? what is my design challenge here, etc. So do things intentionally. That way you're probably going to make the following choices better. But also, as important, who are your users and what is their context? Because depending on that, for example, if you are designing for the elderly, any type of tool that or user research method that presents a really high threshold of learning a new technology or using something that they are not comfortable with will probably reap worse insights or a bit less insights. So we want to adapt to the user in that sense and to their context. The third point, what is your research question? Of course, if we build an interview or a survey, it's really obvious that we will want to understand what is our main question, and we try to translate this in smaller questions and translate this into the questions for the user. Those are different things, but these are different options maybe of type of things you are trying to figure out with your user research. Are you trying to understand the behavior, for example, how people choose between X and Z when they are doing something, or are you trying to gather specific information to design? So feedback from the users on how they prefer a part of your design. So imagine this can happen when you have already done one design and you are doing another round of user research and you want to make it really specific to test some parts of the design, some choices you've made. But also another option is just to, again, assess or test a choice or feature. This is similar to the previous, but more specific. So a specific functionality of my current app, I want to test how it works. There is where we see all the usability testing for apps and websites. Or maybe it's just a hypothesis. In the type of challenges that you guys are tackling, I think there's a lot of preconceived notions, and maybe we think that people are gonna behave in a civic way or not in regards to this, or when they use this type of public space, and we just wanna better understand if that's a preconceived judgment of ours or if it's actually for our specific users the case. Now, with all that in mind, of course, it becomes a bit easier to select the user research method. But if you are in doubt, just basically use what you feel comfortable with, because you are the designer, you are the leader here, and you're going to have to be dealing with the process of leading the user research and then digesting the insights. So whatever you feel comfortable with normally also works as as an approach. And also, once you have that, again, like I said, you have to make sense of these collected insights with the process. So a really basic process will be to take note of all this. You can, if it's qualitative, if it's a qualitative approach, so people have been talking to you in one way or another, maybe it's in a focus group, or maybe it's in a one-on-one interview, etc. You can have a recording, or maybe you have some notes, etc. You can digest from these the main statements or the main quotes and start clustering them in different themes or patterns that you find depending on what's your question. And from there, we can start seeing different insights for your design, getting different information or food for thought for the design choices. But to do that final step, there's some things that make it easier, or that give us a template and a set of steps to do it. For example, a customer journey or an experience map. And these tools are really flexible. You can use them from doing user research itself, for example, using a customer journey to do user research, or you can use them later on to map them. Depends on if you are, for example, mapping what you think is the process of a person of using a service or using certain thing, or what you are now, what you've now learned through user research that is the actual process. But this is just an example I give. There's different ways, but if it's a bit daunting, the idea of digesting these insights, try to look for this type of preset templates. Okay, so hopefully, yeah, so hopefully I did that fast enough, but still somewhat clear. Now I wanted to talk about specific approaches that we think can be useful for the current limitations, mostly. Like we've seen from the first part of today, you guys have already been creative enough. So I'm not sure that's the challenge here. But anyway, these are two main approaches of user research that we use a lot in our faculty, that we are really confident that they can be interesting and that they can be especially adapted to the current times. So how to tackle user research when you cannot meet with people, or when you can organize a group meeting or a discussion, or just lead a creative workshop with a group of citizens or a group of neighbors, or just when you cannot be yeah, in the context where you want to be, like a hospital. So these are design methods that help in today's limitations. The first one I'm going to talk about is research through design, and the second one is generative research. So research through design, what is it? Well, it's when we design or build something, a specific point in building something, so a prototype or an artifact of any kind that acts as a product. So it may look as a somewhat finished product or a prototype of a product, but is mostly aimed at generating knowledge for us, so at helping us in our user research. In that case, it's there just to help us gain a better understanding of the user. So it's a product that is not oriented to propose a solution or to fix anything, although it may look like that. It's just there to generate knowledge. I'm going to give an example of this because, of course, images are indeed more clear often. But for example, the product can present to the user a provocative idea or a new interaction that they've never done. And it has been created not as a solution of the problem you are exploring, but just to spark further thinking or a discussion, or yeah, ultimately uncover new thoughts of the user. And yeah, apart from that knowledge that you can uncover by designing a thing just for research, is also the process of designing a thing that normally creates insights of its own. I mean, you all probably have had the experience that just by trying to do anything in your initiatives, you learn a lot more about the problem itself, about the context, about the different stakeholders, about the people you're designing for. So our thinking is that although you guys are mostly not academics, what we see is that having a more active approach to researching by just producing stuff and showing it to the user and learning from that process, it's really insightful, more than maybe just reading on literature or having a more passive research approach. Now, why is this meaningful in COVID-19 times, research through design? Well, when we have limited communication, or yeah, you know what are the current constraints. When we have that situation, producing an artifact that you can deliver it online, you can send an email to your users, you can send massively, like if it was a survey, but in this case it's something else. Or you can even send physically, maybe by post, to the user, and they can use it in their own time. Or maybe even they use it online while they record themselves. So they use it in their homes while one family member is taking pictures of how they are using it. You can see many different ways. But when we have that option, it facilitates the collection of deeper insights, because yeah, sometimes with a survey we can get certain level of insights, but by seeing people use something, we can learn normally a lot more. So in comparison with other approaches, yeah, it can be even more valuable. Or simply, it can be a good alternative to a type of research activity that cannot happen anymore, like a creative workshop. So if you were planning to set up this workshop, bring in a group of 20 people, and then guide them through a process of doing something together, maybe co-creating something, this can be a good a good exchange for that. You can design, imagine an app, or you can design a product itself, so something they have to use, just to learn from how they do things and just to learn from them. I will jump into the example after this, but some tools to conduct research through design currently. So of course it's all gonna be in the line of online prototyping, and nowadays it's really easy. I mean, it's getting more and more easy to really quickly put together a product in basically 1 week without having to know how to write code. So in sense of producing an app to do user research, you can use things like Protoyo. I put the links there, but it's just an online tool that helps you build an app without having to know how to code or anything like that. And it's really helpful. We use it and our students use it all the time in the faculty. And yeah, if you are working on any type of online platform or app, being able to constantly do this user testing online, it's of course super meaningful nowadays. For the websites, you have Wix or you have many other, Squarespace, etc. I just put it Wix because it's pretty commonly known, pretty easy to use. It's free until a certain point. So yeah, but also as always, PowerPoint or just Keynote, doing a really quick thing on a paper, on a PDF. It's really flexible. You can basically go with many options there. So just never think that technology is going to be an obstacle to prototyping an app or a website or producing anything for research. And you can just do it and tell people to print at home. So another thing that we use to do user research are paper prototypes. So you can imagine any type of product or even website that can be just done in paper, really, really roughly, and give it to the user to try to interact with it or use it at home, maybe while they record themselves with a phone. But anyway, just to give some options, and I put it here a link where you can read in depth and with a bit more time what is research through design. So example of practice, and I think I have to move a bit faster. I wanted to share with you the example of Samira Mikolis that it's working on her master's thesis for the Master in Design for Interaction at the TUDelft. And her assignment is, or what she's trying to achieve is to empower children as positive change makers. And it's interesting case because she started right before the Corona or COVID-19 spread. And she was working from the Netherlands with an organization in Italy. She was planning to travel there in April. She had already established a pretty good relationship with them. She was going to work with a group of children, local children, that would go to that urban civic center every week to do activities. So it was looking really promising. And then the whole thing, of course, went sour, and she had to find really quickly an approach, because also, just so that you understand the context in this type of thesis, they have very few time to do research and the weeks pass by really quickly. So doing user research with children in an urban civic center in Italy when there's a lockdown and you cannot be there. What she did was to come up with an activity for children in the format of an app. So she created an app for children in like 1 week or 2 weeks. And the app was meant to make them create a puppet that would represent their powers or their superpowers. So you're designing with children, you try to make the research really playful. So the app was just a vehicle for them to do things, to make pictures of their puppet and to explain what they've done. The designer was not interested in the outcome, in the puppet that the children were going to design, but mostly in the process of them understanding these concepts of like their own abilities, what they could do about it, etc. So the app was just a means to an end. It was just there to facilitate the process, and so that she could observe that process and get insights from that. And as a result, she was able to understand better what are the limitations and on the other hand, the strengths of children in identifying and communicating societal challenges on their own, and what is their view of their ability to make an impact in these things. Because you can imagine, normally in participation processes or when we ask citizens what they think about something, children are not involved, but do they even see themselves able to be involved in those things? Those were all her questions, and she learned a lot about it by just producing something quickly and making people use it. So the objective was not the app itself, but just what she could learn from the users using the app. And even better, she did not plan this, but the activity also sparked a new approach for the Urban Civic Center, and inspired by the first session that she did with the children and with the Civic Center after the lockdown. The Civic Center started to develop an online program with activities and continued with these online sessions with the children. So yeah, so obviously there was something interesting there. This is the example of one of the different screens of the app, and as you can see, she just used wix.com. She made these drawings and then she put them in the computer and then just uploaded these things as images to the wix.com template, and then you could click, for example, in done or in give me a little help, and it was different screens that were telling the story and were guiding the children through how to reflect about their abilities, but also do their puppet, what problem they would like to solve, etc. And these are some of the results. The image is a bit blurred, but these are the puppets that the children made, and then they made, I think, a video of themselves explaining what was the powers of themselves. And this is just really quickly, but this is a slide from Samira, and this was her whole process. So she had these three main questions, and then she explored them in three activities. She started with the app, so individual use of the app as a facilitator for these hands-on activities, so, and this building of the puppets, and then she followed that with an online talk with the children where they showed each other what they've done, they talked about it. So of course, again, you can learn a lot from that interaction. And then she had 10 interviews more in depth with the children and their parents. Now, in the last minutes I have, I would like to talk also about generative research. That it shares a lot of similarities with research through design, because at the end, what we are stressing here is that by building something, you can learn a lot, even a lot more than just by doing a survey. And that nowadays with the online tools that we have, or just by post, we can make users build their own stuff, or we can make them react to what we build really easily. But anyway, generative research. So what is it? This is an approach that focuses on that interviews and things, user research tools like focus groups have certain limitations. Although they can be super useful and we still use them all the time, it's sometimes difficult to make the difference between what people say and what they do, because this is not always aligned. And we see that a lot of behaviors of people and the way they use things or the way they participate in things come from way more unconscious thinking that we would all like to. So I have this visual here, and it's just to show that in interviews, at the end of the day, we are collecting really explicit knowledge. So what the person says and what the person says is highly filtered, especially when they're talking with someone else. And then if we observe them, if we do ethnography, for example, another user research tool, then we can see what they do. It's already a bit deeper knowledge. But in generative research, what we want is to make people do things. And when we make them make something, we hopefully get more of that unconscious, deeper level of thinking. So hopefully things that maybe they are not even highly aware of, and they just realize through the process, or they don't even realize, and we just can observe it. This sounds really theoretical, but it's at the end of the day super practical. What do we do? Well, we want to gain a deep understanding again of the user, but also the context. And the more we understand the context, also the better we understand the user and the problem. And there's this different generative research techniques that help on this. And you can think about it this way. So with interviews, it's what people say and what they think. With observations, like I said, is what we can see what people do. But with the generative techniques, it's hopefully what people feel and dream and what they are not highly aware of. Now, what are these things? Well, it's about making people do something. It's about making people create, really get hands-on. So you can think again about the puppet of Samira also. And we usually use things like really low-key, like pen and paper and mind map. So maybe we give the user a blank paper, some pen, and then some images and some words just to help start, basically switch on the thinking. And then we have a main question in the center of the paper, and the user has to start creating a mind map. So writing down everything that they can think of and how it's connected. And this can go in a really interesting level of depth just because of the fact of them writing. But there's also a really practical, interesting tool that is just a photo journal. So we can send the user a disposable camera and ask them to take pictures of how they use certain thing in their daily life, or what is their routine when they go to work, etc. This same approach can be done with a booklet. So you can send via post or for them to print. You can send the user a booklet with different exercises so that they have to actually write something or draw something or take pictures of something, etc. It's all the same style. So for example, you can have a booklet with exercise where they have to map or draw their commuting routine, and this can be in PDF, etc. Now, another example of this is the project of How Young. She was trying to engage more citizens, or the citizens that are normally not engaged in smart city dialogue. So really better understand what do they want out of their city in terms of smart city. And she had a couple of research questions, and she did her research through generative techniques. So she came up with 4 main tools. One was a sensitizing booklet. When we talk about sensitizing, it's just about making people prepare for the questions that you have. So making them start thinking about things. And what she included in this booklet, we can see it here, was, for example, for them to map what did a typical weekend in their city, in Amsterdam, look like. And people just made all different types of drawings. She gave them stickers with feelings. So a lot of people went really in depth with how it affected them to do certain part of the weekend in this way, etc. Then different exercises, like for example, what is your topic interest in regards to your city? Another tool was an interview. Like I said, it's still valuable, and especially after you've made people do something, because then they realize of a lot of things they maybe were not so aware of. And then she did a sort of game of traveling in Amsterdam in their commute on their bikes. And last but not least, she produced a newspaper of the future. So she called it Amsterdam Times, and I have a couple of images of them. What you see on the right is the newspaper. She called it Amsterdam Times, and it had all these different images and headlines that would trigger people about the topics of smart cities. In this case, it was waste management, and people could react to it and could feel in a part of it and create their own news, etc. So like you see here, it's all about building something, or basically facilitating the user to build something, and then we can observe that and learn a lot from it. And we just think that these are things that, for example, the Amsterdam Times is that type of approach you can just send online, or you can just create a Google Doc and tell people to fill in. So it sounds really simple, but we realize that the level of knowledge that we generate for this is way deeper than with other approaches. And now time-wise, we have to stop here, but I had this, because these slides are gonna be uploaded, I have these kind of like bonus tips that you can see them, and resources, you can see them later when I upload it to Facebook. Okay, so now I want to hear from you. If you have any specific questions, I can go back to any slide. I hope it was not too overwhelming because of how fast I had to move through it. But yeah. Any questions, guys? Do we have any comments? No? Okay.
I can ask a question, Alicia, if you want.
Oh, yes. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. It's very nice to see, and I think the case studies was very interesting for all of us. I was maybe, can you explore a little bit, or expand a little bit on how you, I think one of the hurdles is how do you make sure that people engage with the research, like, and the selection criteria of who you want to engage with. So doing the research once they're in, but how do you make sure that you get the people to participate and finding the right people?
Yeah, user engagement is almost like a thing on its own, but I can use one of the case examples. So, for example, how Young, the last case I talked about, she wanted to find people that are not the common suspects that get involved into smart city dialogue. So she wanted to go to, so what she did in her case, because there was no corona, of course, she just went to the supermarkets in the neighborhoods where people are from a lower income, because she first did research and realized that that's the people that end up kind of like excluded of these type of conversations or these type of participatory processes. So she went just to the supermarket and standed there and asked people to collaborate in a different activity she set up. Now, nowadays we cannot do that per se, but also she had another approach that maybe we can use now. That is, she found the first person that was willing to collaborate and recorded their opinion. And then with that recording, she asked others to just hear that recording and record their reaction to that. And I think people, the moment they hear something from someone else, they get a bit that spark of like, well, I have my own take on this, or I am now a bit invested on this. So what she found was a way to just trigger the person a bit in a good way to participate in it. So before, what I want to say with this is that sometimes before you ask them for their time, you have to offer something that brings a spark of interest in what you are doing. Or maybe it's just stressing to them the issue and seeing that they highly empathize with it and they are really affected by it, or just as simple as someone else's colleague or another citizen take on the problem, and then that really gets them going, and maybe from there on you can engage them in an interview or a different session. That's just
and specifically,
case I can think of.
And specifically when you work with seniors or children which are less easy maybe to work with, do you have some tips on that as well?
Yeah, well, with senior, I really think the fact of trying to facilitate the process as much as possible and make it, basically bring it to them. So that's why I think sending something by post, like newspaper or a booklet, and then actually picking it up, it can help. So if it's gonna be an issue of technology, it's probably not gonna, it's not something they're gonna be willing to do often, or maybe I also don't want to create stereotypes, but that's often the case. And with children, of course, you have to make them play. We do a lot of research through play, and that is also what Samira did. She just called first with, of course, she first got the agreement of the civic network and of the parents of the children, but she first called the children and said that she had this game for them and they only had to, if they found it fun. And then she produced something that looked fun, that it was not a lot to read, it was not a lot to work, and they basically just had to go through 3 super brief images, and then they started doing something. So, and in her experience and others, I think it's about that. You have to research through play with them a lot. But of course, yeah, I mean, engagement, at the end of the day, you have to to contact the person and ask them if they're willing to do this. But that's why I mean that offering something first before you're asking is like when you use an app. It's really annoying when they're asking for your information and to create an account before the app has offered you anything, right? And that's why Duolingo is so great, because you can, I think, first do a whole play before they ask you anything. So this is similar. I think it often works. But that's just one approach. Kirsten, I don't know if you have others.
No, it's very, very good. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Okay, so
can I still ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Thanks so much for a wonderful presentation. I really got triggered by your generative research and what I see the tension on the one hand between the kind of systematic approach to the interventions that you do, like in our case, the maps and the way we go about them. On the other hand, the open-ended kind of sense-making, interpretation, the exploration, which is very, you have to be very open and very sensitive to things that you didn't predict or were expecting beforehand, to meanings that evolve. And I really I think that's really a key aspect of this design-driven research compared to the standard kind of experimental research. Maybe you can reflect a little bit on that.
Yeah, because what this type of research kind of brings is that it makes the question more complex, which maybe doesn't sound well, but it's just adding a lot more richness to what you're trying to solve, that it's usually more true to reality, right? So often when we just have a more straightforward approach to research, we are just making the question we know we can get a really specific answer to, and that stays on a level of depth that is often superficial. And with this type of processes, we gain an understanding of the context of the problem we are designing for and the people we are designing for, that often it's richer than we expected. And then it adds that richness to the problem. It nuances even more. So even if the ultimate solution, it may be still far when we are doing this, we now understand how complex is what we are tackling in a good way. We now can start in the right direction, and only just the insights of something like this are usually really meaningful. That is what we see in both of these cases that I talked about. Just the process of doing the sessions with people were in its own an interesting result that could be used. In this case, in the case of Samira, it could be used as a process for the civic network or for the civic center. And in the case of Haoyong, just the learnings were already important for the municipality of Amsterdam. Just understanding better how citizens or migrant citizens approach this topic in their daily life. But yeah, I don't know if that answered somehow your question, Aldo.
Very much. I'm sure we'll have more conversations on this in the future.
Great. Thank you. Okay, well, I'm already way past the time here, so if there's any other question, shoot now. Otherwise, I think we're gonna wrap up for today. Oh, there's a chat message.
Thank you. Saying thanks.
Yes, that's great. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Let's close here with a thank you. Thanks a lot for everybody. I think it was great to. Oh, Talita. I lost my microphone, but also scenario is an interesting and maybe useful tool. Indeed, and I think you will see when I upload the slides that all these or most of these tools that you have in the bullet link to an online source where there's more explanation about them. But like I said, most of them, they are in the toolbox. So I just want to again officially direct you to the toolbox of Designscapes. And yeah, I hope you continue implementing user research along the process, even if you're already way past your early stages. And I see you again in the Facebook group. Thank you. I'm going to.
Thank you, Alicia. Thanks. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Ciao. Bye.
Ciao.
Bye. Bye. Ciao.
Bye.